Welcome to Normie to Nerd MCU edition, and today we're talking about multiverses. When we talk about multiverses, we assume that it's just all the other universes connecting to the MCU because of the sacred timeline. But it's actually a whole bunch of other multiverses that are just connecting to each other because the sacred timeline, from the very conception of it, has been TVA propaganda. Like, none of that was real in the sense of what we heard it as the first time we heard it. Like, Miss Minutes tells us that it's the timekeepers that's doing all of this, but it's actually the Loom that is doing all of this. And I think that people just assumed that Kang was only lying about the timekeepers and everything else he said was true. While that can be possible, I'm more kin to think that he's more lying about everything. And the reason for that is because we know there are more multiverses than just the MCU's multiverse. And we know that they have been around before the conception of multiverses in the MCU. And each one of these universes has its own form of metaphysics, its own form of how time travel works, how multiverses work. Like, it's not the same for every universe. For example, in the MCU, we have branched timelines, but we don't have branched timelines in the Foxverse. What happens in the Foxverse when they time travel is it's actually the butterfly effect through temporal consciousness. That's the way that that works. While everyone is thinking like, oh, the sacred timeline is the only iteration or the first iteration, it's more like the sacred timeline was just in its own little box away from the rest of the multiverse that was still happening simultaneously. I mean, we learn in Spider-Verse that 2099 is basically doing the exact opposite of what Kang is doing. Kang, via the TVA, is pruning timelines, which means he's just clipping branches off. Those branches lead to the multiverse, aka Yggdrasil. The Spider Society is doing the exact opposite. They are creating more multiverses by making sure that canon events continue to happen via the Web of Destiny. And like I said, each one of these universes have their own way of going through time travel. It's not the same in all of them. I mean, just look in the X-Men animated universe. They use time travel through time portals. And now we just learned that they have absolute points on a fixed timeline, which means if they go back in time the same way that they do in the Foxverse, they can't do the butterfly effect because the thing is still going to happen the same way no matter what they do. Today we're going to focus on universes. I know it can be confusing that I'm saying universes when we're talking about multiverses technically, but I want you to stay along with me. In my opinion, the way that the multiverse works is that each universe that we see here has its own separate multiverse. Basically like a solar system, but for multiverses. We think our solar system is the only one inhabitable. That's the same thing that the MCU universe thinks, or at least that's what they thought. So far, we only know of one other universe actually having a multiverse in this set of universes that we have here, and that's the Spider-Verse. Everything else is time travel, but so far the MCU and Spider-Verse are the ones that do have a multiversal solar system, if you will. But with the introduction of Deadpool and Wolverine, that will have the multiverse be introduced into the Foxverse as well. So we're just going to have to wait and see how they handle the multiverse, because from what I hear, we will have more terms and things like that be introduced in that, which I know about and which are already on the board back here somewhere. But for now, universes, each universe has its own multiverse. These multiverses are like multiversal solar systems. When these solar systems starts crashing together, that is the incursion. Right now, each one of these universes is separated. There is space between them. But the more multiversal shenanigans that continue to happen, the barrier between them begins to decrease more and more, and that's when the incursion happens, when these universes start to collide, when they start to overlap with one another. I also have a theory that these universes getting closer and closer together is what is actually allowing the watcher to have the capability of being able to watch so many different universes at one time. Because the way that the watchers work is that they kind of work similarly to the system that I'm telling you about, because each watcher basically has their own universe that they tune into to pay attention to that multiverse. The Watchers are basically like Green Lanterns, but for multiversal systems instead of just one solar system. And Uatu has been everywhere. He's been in animated stuff. He's been in live action stuff. He's been everywhere. And I don't think he's supposed to be able to do that. And I think he's only able to do that because of the barrier thinning between these multiverses. This time, we're talking about time travel. Last time we talked about universes. This time, we will talk about time travel in those universes and how it works. Unlike the multiverse, each one of these universes has actually introduced us to a form of time travel in one way, shape, or form. The majority of us will be most aware of how it works in the MCU, of course, and the Foxverse. In the MCU, it works through quantum travel, i.e. the quantum realm. So yes, you are able to travel back in time and forward in time using the quantum realm. We see them do this. In the Foxverse, they do time travel via temporal consciousness. This is what Kitty Pryde does to Bishop and then later to Wolverine, sending their consciousness to an earlier state rather than sending their entire physical being. This is also something that we see happen in the movie Butterfly Effect, but I don't want to get too ahead of myself. As far as it goes for the Spider-Verse, that one's a little bit more iffy because we only get that time travel introduced to us in Madam Web, and that is through clairvoyance, which is her being able to see time in a certain manner and kind of travel to those moments, but not really travel to those moments, but more get a glimpse of what's happening. But it's kind of still time travel, you know what I'm saying? Finally, for the OGs in the animated universe, we have time portals, okay? This is what we see Forge create, we see Bishop use, and we also see Cable use it periodically throughout the show of X-Men, the animated series. We'll talk about time concepts on the next episode, but I just want you guys to kind of understand the basics of how time travel works for every given universe. That was relatively simple. Last time on Normie to Nerdy, we talked about time travel. This time, we're talking about these universes and their time concepts regarding time travel. For the MCU, we have branched timelines via quantum travel. What the Ancient One tells us is that if they take the time stone from her in the past, that it will create a branched timeline, and that universe's timeline will be without the time stone. So basically, if you try to go back in time and change something, you will change something, but it won't be changed for everyone, because there will be a universe where the thing that you were trying to change still happened, if not, it happened worse. The Foxverse introduces butterfly effects to the table. Now, we talked about this happening through temporal consciousness. And what this means is we see Wolverine go back in time and he effectively changes the past. And by doing so, he has directly changed how the future is for everyone. Meaning anything that you do will change the future for everyone in this timeline that we know. And the one that's more iffy again, we have web travel via clairvoyance in the Spider-Verse. Madam Web is able to travel the web of life and destiny, and by doing that, she is being clairvoyant and seeing events that have happened in the future, therefore actively being able to change her past, which really is just solidifying the future, but we won't talk about that right now. And then we have temporal rewind in the animated universe via time portals. And what this means is that, yes, you can go back in time and you can look at things, but you're basically just rewinding to moments. You're not actively able to change those moments like you can in the butterfly effect or in the branched timeline, right? And same with web travel. You're only being able to see a moment in the future usually or past, but with the temporal rewind, you can visit that moment. You can be there and interact with your past self if you wanted to. Those concepts lead us into events, which we will talk about on the next episode. For this installment of Normie to Nerdy, we're talking about events and how they relate to universes. We've talked about time concepts and time travel, but now let's get into those events, baby. First up is a Nexus event. Nexus events are those branched timelines that we talked about before. When a timeline branches off into something different, which doesn't always have to happen via time travel. But when that happens, it's called a Nexus event. A Nexus event creates a multiverse branched off of the main universe where the Nexus event occurred at. At least in the MCU, that's what happens. Now, in the Foxverse, since you can go back in time and change things, it causes an alternate timeline. It changes the timeline completely. With Days of Future Past, Wolverine goes back in time to stop the creation of the Sentinels and all that stuff happening. He does effectively do that and saves everyone in his timeline. But later on, Professor X goes crazy, kills everyone, and then the mutants still basically get eradicated. Therefore, he didn't actually stop anything. It just happened differently. You know what I mean? In Spider-Verse, we're talking about canon events. Canon events are basically something that has to happen in order to keep all of these multiverses in sync or in order and working properly. When Miles is in Pavither's universe in Across the Spider-Verse and he saves the cop and it stops the canon event, we see what happens. So far, we know that Nexus events, alternate timelines, and canon events can all be prohibited. But absolute points, as we know of them now that they have been introduced to us in X-Men 97, these are different. Absolute points are events that cannot be changed. Cable has went back in time multiple times to try and stop the genocide of Genosha. But every time he gets to when the moment is about to happen, he gets ripped from time and put back into the place where he needs to be so that event can happen as it's supposed to. In the events section is when you start to see a lot of crossover in the universes for the events. Like, you can see these things possibly happening in the other universe. It's just manifesting itself in a different way. Let's talk universal concepts regarding the MCU, Foxverse, Spider-Verse, and the animated universe. It's time for Normie the Nerdy. In the MCU, we have Yggdrasil. Yggdrasil is what happens when Nexus events are allowed to happen instead of them being pruned the way that, well, Kang was doing. We do not subscribe to sacred timeline propaganda. Branch timelines create the tree of Yggdrasil. You see what I'm saying? But the concept of the Foxverse is timeline manipulation. Basically the exact opposite of what's going on with Yggdrasil. Through temporal consciousness and the butterfly effect, you can alternate the timeline. You can alter the timeline and then create something new, therefore manipulating the outcome in a certain way. It's just that we're not sure if that outcome actually matters. The concept of the Spider-Verse is the web of destiny, connected through canon events and web travel that someone that's clairvoyant, like Madam Web, would be able to see how these characters connect with each other, which is basically the entirety of what Madam Web is about. We already mentioned that Kang is trying to prune these branched timelines, but Spider-Man 2099 is trying to help canon events happen to create more multiverses. In the animated universe, you have fixed timelines. This is something that we have seen introduced to us via X-Men 97, which means that there are absolute points like the genocide of Genosha that cannot be changed by going back in time and using the butterfly effect. It's only a temporal rewind. You are only able to view the event, but you cannot alter or change or interact with it really in any kind of way. Like I said in the last video, the events correspond with each other a lot. They kind of start trading off in certain aspects from universe to universe. But the concepts do this as well, as we've already shown with the Web of Destiny and Yggdrasil. Those things are so similar, and it's kind of insane how similar they are. Same how you have time manipulation versus a fixed timeline. It's like we are dealing with the yin and yang of multiverse and time itself. And when all these concepts and all of these theories start weaving together and colliding, you get Secret Wars. Say it with me. We do not subscribe to TVA propaganda, okay? Now let's talk about variants. I think this is something that a lot of people miss with Kang, but he basically uses the term variants kind of like muggles, right? Like, it's like they are the lesser version of us. But I'm pretty sure that's just because every Kang thinks that every other Kang is a lesser version of them. When I'm talking about variants, I'm talking about those that are directly in contact with the concepts, time travel, and events that we're even describing here now, okay? For the variants, they actually go with each other even more hand in hand than all of the previous categories. Nexus beings were introduced to us in WandaVision. Anchors are going to be introduced to us in Deadpool and Wolverine. Spider-Man, obviously, we know about them. And then we have the Travelers, okay? In WandaVision, they explain a Nexus being as being the thing that anchors you back to your reality or the reality of your choice. Nexus, because the world doesn't revolve around you, or does it? With the variants of Spider-Man, that gave us the meaning of, hey, all of these characters matter on a multiversal scale, not just in this one universe, but in every universe that they are a part of. They are an anchor to that universe, okay? And then finally, we have the Travelers, right? That's really what you can call Bishop. That's what you can call Cable. They're travelers because they're not able to really do anything about the timeline. All they can do is travel to those different points in the timeline. They're kind of like the human version of the Watchers. Instead of just watching, all they can do is travel. They can even take part of the stuff that's going on, but as far as stopping it, that's not really happening. And now you can really see how all of this stuff really starts to bleed over into each other. Spider-Man are the anchors. Are Spider-Man also Nexus beings? Because Nexus beings have been described as anchors. It's only when you take a step back and really start looking at everything do you see how all of it bleeds over and how all of these concepts have been introduced so long ago.